Hi, this is Philosophy81, and this is part one of the lecture on Buddhism. As always, it's a good idea if you have your book open in front of you so that you can follow along with the terms. So, Buddhism, as we know it today, begins with a man named Siddhartha Gautama. Siddhartha was born in northeast India, present-day Nepal, so near the foot of the Himalayas. And he was born in 563 BCE. Siddhartha was the son of a minor king, and so he was a prince. That would make him in the Kshatriya caste in Hinduism. And of course, he was a Hindu, as was most of India then and even today. So Siddhartha was pretty special. And the Brahmin, the Hindu priests who advised the king, came to the king and said, your son is special, and we want to tell you that he's either going to be a very powerful king like yourself, or he's going to be a very powerful and influential holy man. So the king took that under advisement, and indeed, Siddhartha was special. In fact, while his mother was pregnant with him, he didn't kick or punch or, stomp on her bladder or anything like that. All he did was every once in a while he would just shake a little bit so that she would know he was okay and not worry about him. And apparently the birth was painless and very quick. So some of these auspicious beginnings are part of his story, that he was born quite easily, and he was special, and the Brahmin knew he was going to be something amazing. The king did not want Siddhartha to become a holy man. He wanted Siddhartha to be a king like himself. So he decided, even before Siddhartha was born, that he would make sure Siddhartha was always happy, always saw the good in things, and would realize that being king was a very good thing. That if you were king and the kingdom was running smoothly, it was what you wanted to do and not be a holy man. So the king made some provisions. What he did is, before Siddhartha ever left the palace to go out into the kingdom, he made sure that people went first and cleared out all the dirt and the sick people and the dying people and so forth, and made it just look lovely and happy, so that Siddhartha would know it's good to be king, and I want to be king and keep these people happy. So that worked for quite a while. Now, eventually what happened is, at age 29, Siddhartha was looking at his life, and he had married, he had a young son, and he was looking at his life and realizing he wasn't happy. I mean, he had everything a person could want, but he wasn't happy. So he decided to leave the palace and go looking for his happiness. He got his chariot driver, and they kind of snuck out one day. In fact, they snuck out 4 different times, and something happened each of those times that was significant. So the first time that they snuck out, and the king's people had not had any time to clean things up, Siddhartha saw a sick man. And we're not talking, somebody with a cold. We're talking about probably leprosy, some advanced form of cancer perhaps, but somebody that was ravaged by sickness. And it shocked Siddhartha. And he said to his chariot driver, what's going on here? And the chariot driver said, well, everything decays. Things fall apart. Everything that was once begins to decay and dies off. And this upset Siddhartha because he'd never seen anyone in severe ill health. And he decided to go back to the palace. And he did. And of course, he hadn't found any happiness. And so the second night, he goes out, and he sees an old man. The old man is, hunched over, leaning on a cane. He's white beard, white hair, very old, very feeble. and he had not seen an old man. And so he says to his chariot driver, what's happening here? Well, the chariot driver said, this man is old. He is decaying. Everything, including you, will become old and feeble. This upset Siddhartha even more than just seeing a sick man, and he went back to the palace, and he thought about it. He thought about his beautiful wife and what she would look like as she aged and became decayed and decrepit. He thought about losing his own strength and his own vitality. So third night, or third day, he went out again, snuck out, and this time he saw a corpse. So, as you know from the Hinduism section, it was common for the Hindus 2,500 years ago. They would take the dead out of the house, and then they would be prepared, and there would be a burning of the body and preparations, of course. So he saw a corpse in the street, or by the side of the street, and that kind of tipped the scale. He realized right there that the problem of decay, that everything that is and comes into being ceases to be. The problem of decay really got to him. And he thought about it, the death of his father, and, of course, the death of himself. So on the fourth day, he goes out. This is the last one. He goes one more time, and he sees a sannyasi, as you know, a Hindu ascetic who was started out as a forest dweller. And he sees in the eyes of the sannyasi peace, the peace that he's been looking for. And he says, that's got to be the key. I need to become a sannyasi and leave this world which has not made me happy and go find the happiness I'm looking for. So that night, after his wife and child have fallen asleep, he kisses his wife and son goodbye, and he gets on his favorite horse and he rides to the edge of the forest. At the edge of the forest, he gets off the horse, turns the horse around, slaps it on the butt so that it'll go back to the palace, and he goes into the wilderness. Now, the story is that when the horse gets back to the palace, he actually dies of a broken heart because he knows he'll never see Siddhartha again. But Siddhartha goes into the forest, and in the typical forest dweller tradition, he no longer thinks about the world as we know it. He doesn't think about his family. He doesn't think about his horse. He doesn't think about food. He doesn't think about shelter. He lives in the forest. He finds some other forest dwellers, and they spend their time doing various meditation techniques and um, and refuting the body. In other words, denying that the body is important. He's realizing that just your spirit is what's important. And a lot of the sannyasis have been practicing some extreme measures, like lying on a bed of nails. And you may have seen pictures of that, where there are boards, basically, that are nailed from underneath. And so the nail points are sticking up, and there are, lots and lots of them, and they lie down on it. And each of those points point into their skin and puncture it a little bit. And some of them go to extremes to have people push on them, or they have weights placed on them. And they would do things like hang upside down by their feet from a tree. Just various forms of what we would think of as, self-abuse. But at the time the sannyasi were doing it, they were doing it to show that the body did not matter. The body didn't mean anything. So if someone would hang by their feet for 5 hours, Siddhartha would hang by his feet for 10 hours. He did everything he could do, and he did it to the extreme. So he is practicing meditation. He is practicing a lot of the sannyasi techniques. He is studying. He is discussing things with other sannyasis. And after 6 years, he finds that he's still not happy. He hasn't found that peace he was seeking. In 6 years, he also ate very little. In fact, the story says that he had 1 spoonful of water and 1 grain of rice per day. So at the end of 6 years, he was emaciated. He was just skin and bones. In fact, he said that he was so thin that he could reach his hand from in front and close his hand around his spine because he had, no body fat whatsoever. He was weak, and he was becoming feeble because of that weakness. And so he realized, he said, look, I spent the first 29 years of my life in splendor. I had everything I could ever want. I spent the last 6 years in complete deprivation. I deprived myself of everything. It was just the complete opposite. He said, neither has brought me happiness. Neither has brought me peace. He says, there must be the middle way, a middle way in which I can find um, the happiness I'm looking for. So it's not extreme denial, it's not splendor, and sometimes Buddhism gets called the middle way. He ate some food and gained some strength, and after about 2 weeks, when he was feeling stronger, he started to think about when, if ever, had he felt that sense of peace that he was looking for. And he remembered that as a child he had meditated, and that in that meditation he found the peace. So he took a vow, and he said, I'm going to sit under this Bodhi tree. The Bodhi tree is a type of fig tree. It's called Bodhi because Bodhi is part of the prefix of the word for enlightenment. So we now call it the Bodhi tree. He says, I'm going to sit under this tree, and I'm not going to move until I get enlightenment, and until I find that peace I'm looking for. So he sits down under the trees or under the tree, and some of his followers, because he had gained some followers from this discussion with the sannyasi, some of his followers sat in front of him and around him, and just watched him. So the first night came in, and it actually happened all in one night. And in the first night, as he sat there meditating, the night was just full of hallucinations. There were hallucinations of greed and hate, and then there were temptations. And it was interesting because first he was tempted. He'd been starving for 6 years, and he was tempted by hallucinations of feasts. He was tempted by beautiful women. He was tempted by all sorts of comforts. The temptations came from Mara, the demon of illusion. Now, if you remember, in Hinduism, we had Maya, who was not a demon, but was the cosmic force of illusion. Same activities, basically. It's just one, Maya, is a cosmic force, and Mara, in Buddhism here, is the demon of illusion. So Mara was the one who was tempting him, and then when the temptations didn't work, Mara began to try to frighten him with hallucinations of things like tigers that were going to come and eat him, and herds of elephants that were running through him. Torrential storms. I mean, it was raining just so heavily. And what happened in the rain is that some of the snakes, the cobra, that can expand their necks and make those hoods, they came up behind him, and several of them got behind him and spread their hoods to make a cover or an umbrella over him. Sometimes you see sculptures of him in meditation with the cobras behind him. So they are protecting him because the animals, the living animals, not the hallucinations, realized who he was, that he was special. So after this night full of terrible traumas and hallucinations, and then powerful temptations, and Siddhartha did nothing but sit there and continue his meditation. In the morning, when the sun rose and he opened his eyes, he said, I see through this illusion. I see that this illusion was created by Mara, the demon of illusion. Actually, what he said is, I see through the builder of this house, and that builder is Mara. So he says, I am now enlightened to the truth. I understand karma and samsara, so the rebirth cycle, and moksha in Hinduism, which we are going to now use a different term in Buddhism, similar but different. The Buddhists use the term nirvana. He says, I understand these things. So in Hinduism, moksha was liberation from the cycle. In Buddhism, nirvana liberates you from that cycle, but it's not the same. It's more like an extinguishing of the fires of passions, because your passions and your delusions are the thing that keep you reborn. So we'll talk more about that. So he saw through the delusions and the hallucinations, and he said, I understand it now. And he decided to vanish from the world. He basically said, teaching you is useless. You won't understand. Only people who meditate will understand this. Only one who has meditated and seen the insights, gotten the truth, has become enlightened, will understand. At this point, we stop calling him Siddhartha and we can call him the Buddha. The Buddha simply means an enlightened one, and he is the enlightened one that began the current version of Buddhism. But instead of vanishing from the world, some of the gods, who are also trapped in samsara, begged him to teach, and because of his compassion, he decided to stick around and teach the way of awakening. The way of awakening is also called the Dharma. So you had the term Dharma in Hinduism, and Dharma in Hinduism means your sacred duty. It's what you're supposed to do to be a moral person. However, in Buddhism, Dharma has a different meaning. It's still spelled the same. It's still Dharma. But in Buddhism, Dharma means the eternal truth about reality. It also means the teachings of the Buddha. So we can refer to, well, the Buddha is teaching the Dharma, the way of awakening. And the way of awakening comes through the eternal truth about reality. So we've got some ideas that are compressed into this term Dharma that are pretty powerful. By understanding the Buddha's teachings, you can find your way out of this samsara rebirth cycle, and you can understand the truth. Um, the idea here in Dharma is that the Dharma, since it's an eternal truth, it has always been, and people have known it throughout various times in history, but it gets forgotten. People forget it, they maybe switch to different ideas, and the idea of the eternal truth or the eternal truth gets forgotten. Every once in a while, however, someone would remember or become enlightened, like Siddhartha did, and remember the Dharma and teach it. So it's revived. We are remembering it. We're rediscovering it, and we have become awakened when we rediscover it and when we understand it. At this point, it's probably not going to be forgotten. I mean, of course, everything is possible, but since we have such extensive records and forms of communication, whether it's written or electronic or who knows, whatever technology comes up with, we have the ideas of the Dharma, and we probably won't need to rediscover them because they probably won't be lost again. So he has the truth. What is the truth? Well, we have two ideas that come up that are very important in Buddhism, in all forms of Buddhism. In Buddhism, there is a focus on the idea of impermanence. Nothing lasts forever. Everything changes. Everything that comes to be fades away. Whether we're talking about the universe or the world or you or your soul or anything, it all decays. It all goes away. So you can see that that is somewhat familiar with, or similar to what the chariot driver had told him in his 4 trips out of the palace. Everything that is, well, he saw a sick man and an old man and a dead man, and he saw that progression of people fading away. So impermanence, nothing is permanent. And we have to understand that and accept that. The second big concept is the concept of compassion. Buddhism is driven by ideas of compassion. Compassion for all living things, compassion for yourself, compassion, compassion, compassion. You want to try to end the suffering of others. You want to try to make the world a better place with less suffering for all, including animals. So, doctrine of impermanence and the concept of compassion, two important ideas. The third important idea is called the Four Noble Truths. He lists these things that are the truths of reality. They are explaining what's going on in our lives and what we need to do. So, first of all, there is suffering. I'm going to just go through the four of them quickly, and then I'm going to come back and spend more time. So first, there's suffering. Secondly, there is the cause of suffering. Thirdly, there is a way to release yourself and others from the suffering. And fourth is the pathway to actually release yourself and others from suffering. So let's go back to number one, suffering. People create their own suffering. And we are aware of that a lot of times, and we say, oh, I shouldn't have done that, it was a stupid mistake, and those kind of things. But he's talking here about the suffering that comes because we don't realize that everything is impermanent. We don't realize that when I'm trying to keep my car from getting scratched, or I'm trying to keep the kitchen clean, whatever it might be, right, that I'm causing suffering because I'm trying to hold on to something that I can't hold on to. Things change. He's not saying don't just let it go, don't just do whatever, right? He's saying you can clean your car, or the stove, or whatever it is, but don't get so wound up in it that you cause yourself to suffer. It's a psychological suffering, certainly in this case. It's something that we all do. I have done it. I still do it. Every once in a while I take my stove apart, for example, and I clean it very, very thoroughly. And then after that, I don't want to use it. It's like, no, I don't want to get it dirty. And my son will be like, can I cook some eggs? No, no, have a sandwich. Don't use the stove. And eventually what happens is, within a couple days, I'll start to let go of it a little bit. And then eventually go back to using the stove and it gets dirty again. And then I will clean it thoroughly again. And the problem with this is that I'm causing suffering to others, not letting them use the stove, for example. I'm also causing suffering to myself by being upset that, oh, it's dirty, right? How many of you who have children have ever yelled at or been yelled at by your parents because you got the stove dirty, right? We try to hold on to things, and they're impermanent. The stove seems kind of superficial. Yes, of course they get dirty, but you have to understand everything is like that. And if you try to hold on to it, you cause suffering. Okay. So, second noble truth is the cause of that suffering. I've already kind of mentioned it, but basically they describe it as it is the craving and the attachment to your desires. I'm sure there have been things that you have wanted that have, literally driven you crazy, right? You can't focus on anything else. That's all you can think about. You want it. You're causing yourself suffering because you are attached to your desires. You are craving something, and that craving perpetuates the life cycle of birth and death and birth and death because you keep coming back to get these things. there's nothing wrong with desire. And some people look at Buddhism and say, well, how can I not have a desire? There's actually nothing wrong with desire. The Buddhists recognize desires arise. I get thirsty. I want to drink. It's if I attached to the idea of having a drink of my iced tea that is so powerful, I start to lose my train of thought, right? I want a drink of iced tea. I'm thirsty. That's a craving. That's okay. I can do several different things. I can take a drink and satisfy that craving. No problem there. Or I can simply tell myself, put that craving on hold, a few more minutes till you're done with part one of this lecture, and then you can have a drink. Or I can continue lecturing and not take a drink and not think about putting it on hold, and hold on to that attachment and think, oh God, I want a drink. I need a drink. I got to have a drink of my tea right now. It's that last one that's a problem. When you make those cravings your focus and your purpose, you cause yourself suffering and you probably cause others suffering. So the third noble truth is that there is a way to release yourself from suffering. It is possible to end those cravings, basically to end the attachment to the desires. So in that frame of thought, our attachment to material things is something that we perhaps need to let go of. Think about things like your house is being burgled and you want to defend it. You pull out your gun and you shoot the burglar. Okay? In Buddhist ideology, that would be wrong because you have harmed someone else to hold on to your physical or material possessions, which are impermanent anyway. So you need to stop being so attached to things. It's very hard to do and live in our world. Of course, it becomes easier for the monks and the nuns who practice Buddhism 24/7, but we can do quite a bit as individuals in the world. So the fourth noble truth is the path to release the craving. So it's called the Noble Eightfold Path. So we have the Four Noble Truths, and now we have the Eightfold Path. Buddhists love to number things, and so we'll have a lot of things that are called, the number this and that. But the Eightfold Path is a step or 8 steps, which if you practice these, you can lessen your attachments and your desires. So I'll go through the 8 of them real quickly and then we'll come back and go over them. We have right view, right thought, right speech, right action, right occupation, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. So right view. Right view is the beginning step. It is understanding the Four Noble Truths. So you have study and insights into the Four Noble Truths. You recognize that all life is suffering and humans cause their own suffering, but there is a way to end it. So that's right view. Right thought. Well, right thought is having the right intention, the right motive, the right attitude. You want to follow the Eightfold Path and end suffering, not just for yourself, but for everyone. You're trying to free all beings from the suffering. It's not a selfish intention. Right speech. Well, right speech would be about morality of the words you say. So no lying, no harsh or abusive language, no gossip. I try to maintain that myself, but I occasionally whip out some harsh or abusive language, especially if my son gets the stove dirty. But right speech is controlling what you say. Right action, then, is controlling what you do. So you don't want to kill anyone, you don't want to create any harm, no stealing, no drunkenness, no promiscuity. You don't want to do anything that could harm someone else. So this might, in the modern world, even translate into things like no speeding on the freeways or no running a stop sign. Why? Because you could easily harm someone. So you need to do actions that will be safe and not harm anyone. Next would be right occupation. Well, you need to have a job that's going to allow you to do the right speech, the right action, and so forth. So you wouldn't sell guns. You wouldn't be a butcher. You wouldn't sell liquor or drugs. Those kind of things. Teacher, good occupation. Teacher of Eastern religions, good occupation. So you need to have the right job that will help you to follow the Eightfold Path. Next is right effort. And right effort is, putting out the effort, right? You need to persist in avoiding evil and fostering good. You don't want to be out there causing problems. You need to be in the world helping, doing good things, making things better. Next is right mindfulness. Right mindfulness is sometimes described as serenity and being in the moment. The idea here is that if you fret about the future, okay, you worry and you're not going to be serene. If you worry about the past, which has already happened, right, you're not going to be serene. You need to be in the moment, and in that moment, you need to be calm. There's no need to get excited. Why do we get upset? Why do we get excited? Why do we use harsh language and hurt people and all of that kind of stuff? Because we're not staying serene. We are thinking about, well, how dare you try and take my thing? Or how dare you cut me off on the freeway? I'm going to follow you and kill you. Whatever these emotions come up. Emotions aren't bad, but you have to understand where they're coming from. You need to have emotions that come from a space of the compassion and the desire to relieve suffering of yourself or for yourself and all others. Not selfish desires that say, well, I want this for me. It's all about me, and I need to do this and I want it now, right now. Nope, that's not good, because you're not even permanent, right? So you having a selfish desire is foolish, because you're impermanent too. Last on the Eightfold Path is right concentration, which is remembering the other seven on the Eightfold Path, focusing on them. So, maintain the ideas of mindfulness and put in the effort and so forth. Watch your speech, watch your actions, understand the Four Noble Truths. If we emphasize the pathway of the Eightfold Path and look at our individual responsibility, our individual effort and intention, and focusing on the idea that all life should be directed or redirected toward ending suffering. That doesn't mean just for you, right? Like I might end suffering because I go and I take something from someone else because I want it, and now I've ended my suffering, at least temporarily, but I've caused suffering in that person. So we need to follow the Eightfold Path, understand the Four Noble Truths. So a little bit back to the impermanence, or the doctrine of impermanence. The doctrine of impermanence again says all things are impermanent. Nothing lasts forever, including the self. There is no substantial existing self, no unified soul, no mind, no me, no I to fight for. So striving for egoistic things, even wanting recognition or reward is basically meaningless, because you're not a permanent thing and you're not an individual. I'll talk more about that in part 2, but the idea is that you are a temporary display of these psychophysical elements that process and perceive and categorize and act. And as you go through the samsara cycle and you die, that group of psychophysical elements breaks up and sends you to many different places. So there's no permanent you. It's not like in Hinduism where the idea was you were born and then you died and you were born again and it was the same you, just in a different life. In Buddhism, we don't have a permanent self. Okay, I'll wrap that up for part 1. Make sure you move on to part 2.